Hi. Today we're going to start kind of our second big topic in the nervous system. So we're going to be moving away from nervous tissue and all of the fun physiology of transmitting nervous signals to some anatomy. So we're going to take a look at the anatomy of the central nervous system, the brain, and the spinal cord today. And then in the next lecture, we're going to take a look at the protections of the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. And then in the last part of this module, we're going to take a look at the anatomy of the peripheral nervous system. So looking at what makes up a nerve, some specific nerves in our body like the cranial nerves and what they control, our spinal nerves, the plexes that they form, and then some of the more important peripheral nerves of the body. So today we're going to kind of focus on the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. So we're focusing on the anatomy of these two structures here. You're going to be dissecting a brain in class, a shape brain, but I wanted to, and I know in the PAL software you can see preserved brains, but I wanted to kind of give you an idea of what a unpreserved, fresh, so this is basically an unfixed brain that has been just removed from the body looks like, because its texture is quite different when it hasn't been preserved. So we're going to watch this video clip that demonstrates some of the characteristics of an unfixed brain.
Students think that the brain is sort of the consistency of a rubber ball, and that's because in the laboratories and teaching specimens we have fixed, formalin-fixed brains. However, if you're a trauma surgeon or a neurosurgeon, you realize that the brain is really very, very soft and much more vulnerable than the impression you get looking at the fixed brain. So I would like to show you a 1,400 gram brain that has just been removed from an autopsy, and we are fortunate enough to be able to show you what a normal, unfixed, recently deceased patient's brain would look like. This is the ventral surface of the brain, and what you see are the Peel vessels, this nice blush with the clear leptomeninges and the vessels running in between the arachnoid and the pia. The cerebral spinal fluid has leaked out through the cisterns, and so the subarachnoid space is no longer visible unless I move the brain, but it's very, very soft. Notice it's totally squishy. It's the consistency, it's much softer than most of the meat you would see in a market. So if I were to pinch this in either way, I could easily damage this with my thumb. In fact, neurosurgeons, when they are doing surgery, often just evacuate with a vacuum or suck out parts of the brain. This string here has been placed around the basilar artery so it can be suspended in a bucket of formaldehyde in order to denature the protein and harden it. If we didn't, it would sit on the bottom of the bucket and the brain would become deformed, as you would see here, so that it would be compressed in this direction just from the weight of the brain. So that points out one of the purposes of the cerebral spinal fluid is to float the brain inside the calvarium and act as a cushion. The cerebellum is easily seen, the medulla, the pons. Here you can see the arachnoid spanning across the space here at the base of the brain. The optic nerves are very obvious, as are the olfactory nerves. Here are our temporal lobes, and here is the uncus on either side. The uncus, remember, is the most mesial part of the temporal lobe. The tentorium that fit in here has been removed, but we can see a slight groove right along here where the tentorium sat. So there is no evidence in this brain of any of the temporal lobe herniating medially over the edge of the tentorium. It's a beautiful specimen. Unfortunately, this cancer patient died of complications secondary to a cell transplant. Here you can see how soft and pliable the dura is, and we can look down between the hemispheres and see the corpus callosum. I can also see a bit of the anterior cerebral artery coming over the surface. So this is the interhemispheric fissure. And if I turn the brain around and we look at the occipital lobe, we can see the top of the cerebellum. And here there is a very small amount of blood that was actually seen on MRI that the patient had before death. If I let the cerebellum hang down a little bit, you can see the superior surface of the cerebellum. Turn it back around. So our very delicate and vulnerable brain, with its two vertebral arteries on the medulla, its basilar artery on the pons, it's branching to the posterior cerebral artery right here where you have the cerebral peduncle, and here we have the space here is the interpeduncular cistern, and we can see the two mammillary bodies. The pituitary gland stayed within the body, and here you can see the base of the brain with the optic nerve, the chiasm, and the tract. You can see here an impression, a depression just from where I was holding the brain. Just from holding it that small amount of time, the depression from my finger is clearly visible. Think how vulnerable the brain is, then think how narrow and small the spinal cord is, and what a devastating consequence just a quick subluxation of the vertebra or a herniation of the disc can cause to the delicate spinal cord, which is about the width of one of these gyri. These gyri are nice. There's no big space between them, but neither does it look particularly swollen for a patient of this age.
Okay, so hopefully that gave you kind of an idea of what a real human brain looks like, and you can kind of make some comparisons when we dissect the sheep brain. So I want to first kind of go over the four major regions of the brain. You heard her referring to a lot of structures there, and then we'll kind of get into a little more depth in some of the structures that make up each of those four regions. But the first region of the brain, which is kind of like tan colored here in this picture, is the cerebrum, or it's sometimes referred to as the cerebral hemispheres. So this is the bulk of the brain. The second part of the brain that we're going to look at, which is indicated in purple in this picture, is called the diencephalon. Now, you can't really see much of the diencephalon unless you remove those cerebral hemispheres, or if you do a mid-sagittal cut through the center of the brain, and then you'll be able to see these structures because they're all kind of enveloped or buried within the cerebrum. To orientate yourself, hanging off here is a gland that you guys have already learned about. That's actually the pituitary right there hanging off as part of the diencephalon. The third part of the brain here is the little brain, and you saw that pretty well in the video. This is the cerebellum. And so it sits underneath the occipital lobe at the back of the brain here. And then the fourth major region of the brain is called the brain stem. And the brain stem has three components to it. The medulla oblongata, which is down here, the pons, and then the midbrain, and we'll take a look at what each of those structures does. So we're going to start out with the cerebral hemispheres. So the cerebral hemispheres are a bulk of the brain. Um, over here, so I'm not over top of the picture there. Um, so it's the largest portion of the brain. Its functions include thought and interpretation of senses and memory and motor response and movement and processing. So pretty important structure. Um, it is made up of gray matter and white matter. And so if you look at this cross section of the brain down here, you can see gray matter. And the gray matter is in the cerebral cortex towards the surface. To give you an idea, gray matter typically in the brain is somewhere between 1 and 5 millimeters deep. There are also some isolated areas of gray matter kind of mixed um, in the cerebrum that are called basal nuclei. But the gray matter is important for coordination and movement. And then below the gray matter, you can see deep to it is the white matter. And the reason it appears white is because there is a lot of myelin located in these areas. So there's our white matter. Now you notice the surface of the brain was covered with all of these ridges, right? These ridges, these humps, the mountains, you heard it referred to as gyri. Between them, we have dips, right? So kind of a more shallow dip is called a sulci, or a sulcus, many sulci. A very, very deep dip, like a really deep sulcus, we call a fissure. And so there are major fissures that divide the brain into different lobes. And the gyri and sulci help increase the surface area of the brain. So those lobes of the brain correspond to the same names we used for the bones that cover them. So you guys already know these. So we have the frontal lobe, which is going to be in the front. We have the parietal lobe, which is going to be kind of posterior and to the sides. We have the temporal lobe, which is going to be in the temporal region of the head. And then in the back here, we have the occipital lobe. And then each of these lobes has some different areas that have some different functions. We'll start back here at the occipital lobe. This is a location of what we call the visual cortex. So this is the area of the brain that's responsible for vision. There's actually a fissure that divides the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe. You can't really see it unless you were in this view. I'm going to put kind of like a dashed line here for that fissure. It's called the parieto-occipital fissure. But you can only see it when you split the line into a right and left half and look on the inside, and you'll be able to see that fissure. So that's why I kind of dashed it here. If we go from the occipital lobe, the next lobe we're going to look at is the parietal lobe here. And the parietal lobe, what you can't see is there's a big fissure, right? You could see it when she was looking at, when she was showing you the human brain, right? There's a big fissure that runs down the center, right? Splits the brain into right and left half. That particular fissure is the longitudinal fissure. And so it splits the parietal lobe into a right and a left half also. We also have a big sulcus that marks the boundary of the parietal lobe. So right through here, this deep cut there is called the central sulcus. So behind the central sulcus is parietal lobe, and in front of or anterior to the central sulcus is going to be frontal lobe. Now there's an area back here just behind the central sulcus, right in here, which is called the primary somatosensory cortex. I'm going to abbreviate there because I'm running out of room. Primary somatosensory cortex. So this is where information about our senses is sent to. So pain and touch, not special senses, like vision has a separate area and we'll look at taste and smell, but our general senses. So that is our parietal lobe. And then in front of the central sulcus, you can see another region that's kind of like a brighter red here. So if behind the central sulcus is our primary somatosensory cortex, anterior to the central sulcus, we have our primary motor cortex. So this is where information from motor responses going to come from. So skeletal muscles. And everything in front of that central sulcus is part of our frontal lobe. In the front here, we also have a region called the prefrontal cortex. And this is the area of the brain that is responsible for abstract thought and predicting, like predicting consequences from actions, for example. This is the area of the brain that takes longer to develop. And there have been some studies published that show that it takes longer to develop in males than females. And it's important for being able to make a good judgment about consequences of actions. So I'll leave that right there, and you can chew on that for a little bit. But in some people, it doesn't develop into the mid-20s. Now, dividing the frontal from the temporal lobe, we have another kind of groove here, another sulcus. It's called the lateral sulcus. And the lateral sulcus divides the frontal from the temporal lobe. Now, an important part of the temporal lobe in kind of this area is the auditory cortex, and auditory means the special sense of hearing. So we have an auditory cortex actually on both sides of the cerebral hemispheres. Now, if we take a look at this picture, we can see on the left-hand side, we can see some tools here kind of pulling apart the cerebral hemispheres, and within here, we have an area that's called the insula. And so in order to be able to see these next sections, you have to basically retract at the lateral sulcus. And underneath there, we have two areas that are responsible for the sense of taste. So we have the gustatory cortex. And then also in this area, we have the sense of smell. So both taste and smell, special senses are routed to these areas of the brain. Now we also have some areas of the brain on the left hemisphere. So this picture up here, that are unique to the left hemisphere. We have an area over here called Broca's area. This area of this cerebrum is responsible for motor speech. So being able to actually physically form words by moving our mouth and our tongue. And then there's another area here called Wernicke's. And this is the language comprehension area. So on the left side of the brain, you have a region that is responsible for you being able to understand language. Okay, so we're going to move on from the cerebral hemispheres, and now we're going to move down to the diencephalon. And the diencephalon has three parts to it. It has the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. In this picture here, I want to point out the corpus callosum. That's right in here, and she showed it to you on the actual brain too. This is what connects the right to the left side of the brain. So it's a tract of white matter that basically connects the two hemispheres. The thalamus makes up what are basically the lateral walls. So the diencephalon is in this region here. And if you can imagine like the back, so I'm going to kind of put a T back here, the lateral wall, and there would be one on the other side. And it's an important area for sensory relay in our brain. Another part of the diencephalon is the hypothalamus, which you guys have already learned about. So if you find the pituitary, right, here's the pituitary gland, it's hanging off of the hypothalamus. So here's the hypothalamus. It's basically like the floor of the diencephalon. It's important for regulating things like temperature and hormone. It produces hormones that also regulate the pituitary. It's the link between the endocrine system and the nervous system. It's also important in the autonomic nervous system. And then the last part of the diencephalon is the epithalamus. Epithalamus, epi, upon, it's the roof of the diencephalon. In here you'll find the choroid plexus, and actually in this picture you can see like this red structure is actually choroid plexus. The choroid plexus secretes cerebrospinal fluid. Also, part of the epithalamus is another gland that you guys are familiar with. That's the pineal gland. So right at the back here, this is the pineal. And the space that's actually in the diencephalon is called the third ventricle. And we'll take a look at the ventricles and the cerebral spinal fluid coming up in another mini lecture. So here's an actual human brain diencephalon. So to orientate yourself at the back here, here's the pineal gland. This is that corpus callosum that connects the two parts of the brain. Here would be the thalamus. The hypothalamus. The thalamus would be more like the wall back here, whereas the top part here would be like the epithalamus, kind of in this region. Here is kind of where the pituitary would have hung down, but it's not there. Just in front of it here is actually the optic chiasm, the crossing of the optic nerves. So the pituitary would have kind of sat in here. There's a little structure back here that I didn't mention, put an M on it. It's called the mammillary body. I think she pointed it out in the cadaver brain, but it's part of the limbic system. It's important for the limbic system as kind of a functional region of the brain. It includes things like motion and behavior, and also memory is part of the limbic system. Okay, moving on. The next major part of the brain is the brain stem. So the brain stem includes the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. Now in this picture here, we have two views of it. So it's everything that's green in this picture here. So the midbrain is at the top, the pons is in the middle, it's the bridge, and the medulla oblongata is down here. Now if we look at this other version where they've removed the brain stem, the midbrain is up here in this green area. This blue area would be the pons, and down here in the red would be the medulla oblongata. And you can see a lot of the cranial nerves coming off this area, and we'll take a look at those in an upcoming lecture. But the midbrain is important for visual and auditory processing and reflexes of vision and hearing. The brainstem in general is really important for the autonomic nervous system. The word pons means bridge, and it's a relay center for somatic visceral input, and also motor control has a role in respiration. And the medulla, which as it comes down, it joins the spinal cord here, is a relay area for sensory information, control of automatic functions like heart rate and digestion, blood pressure are all part of the medulla's function there. And here's a picture of a actual medulla, pons and midbrain, and actually at the very top to kind of orientate yourself. So if this was like removed from the brain, you're looking at it from the posterior. So this is part up here is actually part, that's the thalamus. In the center here, this is the pineal gland, which secretes a hormone, right, the sleepy hormone. Just below it, you can see, I kind of tried to outline it because you'll be able to see this pretty well in the sheep when you kind of pull apart the cerebrum from the cerebellum. You'll be able to look back here and see what are called the superior. So the superior on the top, the inferior on the bottom, colliculi. Below that, we have what are called the peduncles, which are going to be really part of the pons. There's a space in here that you can see, but it's just called the fourth ventricle. So it's one of the spaces that cerebrospinal fluid circulates around. And then the last part of the brain is the cerebellum, or the little brain. You can see that it also has folds to it, just like the cerebral hemispheres do, but the folds are much more narrow, right? It also has two hemispheres. It has a right and left half. It also has white and gray matter, like the cerebral hemispheres. So down here you can see the white matter is deep, and the gray matter is on the outside, closer to the surface. It forms something that looks kind of like a tree. It's called the arbor vitae, which means tree of life. The cerebellum is important for balance and equilibrium. This is kind of it remembers like learned movement patterns. This area of the brain is really impacted by alcohol. So when you see someone who's had too much to drink and they have that kind of like walk mannerisms about them that just seemed a little off, that's because the cerebellum is not coordinating movements like normal. Or someone who's had damage to this area of the brain may just always look like they're under the influence of something. So that's the cerebellum. And here's a look at a real cerebellum, and another look at that arbor vitae, that tree of life, the white matter in the center here. Okay, the last thing that we're going to look at in this mini lecture is a quick introduction to the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is about 18 inches long, and it's also made up of gray and white matter. And over here we can see an actual human spinal cord. So to orientate yourself, you can see that there's been a laminectomy where they have sawed through the lamina of the vertebrae and be able to expose the spinal cord. So spinal cord is in the center here, and then coming off the spinal cord, you can see the roots, which are going to form the spinal nerves that then leave and go out to other areas of the body. The spinal cord ends at what's called the conus medullaris, and so conus medullaris. The spinal cord ends between L1 and L2. Each of the regions of the spinal cord is color coded here, but up at the top here we have the cervical region in blue. And so C1 through C8 nerves, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are the cervical nerves. And then below that, we have the thoracic region. And the thoracic region of the spinal cord gives rise to T1 through T12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then below that, we have the lumbar region. And the lumbar region is going to give rise to L1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then below that down here in the pink, we have what's called the sacral region. And that's S1 through S5. So below, once we get down to where the conus medullaris is, so from L2 to at sacral 5 is what's called the cauda equina, the horse's tail. So there's not spinal cord there. The spinal cord ends up here, and you have spinal nerves that kind of branch out below that area. Also, you can see in here what are called the enlargements of the spinal cord. So there's a cervical enlargement and a lumbar enlargement where you can see the spinal cord is slightly larger, and that has to do with the number of nerves and the areas of the body that they serve. When it comes to the extremities, it makes the spinal cord a little bit larger there. The last thing we're going to look at here is a cross-section of the spinal cord. So the spinal cord, just like the brain, also has gray matter and white matter, except for you can see it's inverted. So in the spinal cord, the white matter is towards the outside, so this is all white matter. And the gray matter is deeper, and the gray matter forms kind of like a butterfly here. These are called horns. And remember, it's gray because there's not a lot of myelin sheaths in there. There are a lot of bodies of cells. So there's kind of a sulcus at the back of the spinal cord here. So this is the dorsal. This is going to be the ventral. So there's kind of a dip on each side here. The one that's in the back there is called the posterior median sulcus. The one that's on the ventral area here is called the anterior median sulcus. In the very center of the spinal cord, there's actually a hole right here. It's called the central canal, and that's an area where cerebral spinal fluid circulates around. The areas of white matter are named for the area of the spinal cord they're in. So the ones that are on the side are called lateral white matter. The ones that are towards the front are called ventral or anterior white matter. The ones in the back are called dorsal, right, or posterior white matter. And so the white matter is white because there's a lot of myelin sheaths in that area. Now the white matter, we'll get into this more when we get further into how the nervous system functions a little bit. But white matter contains nerve tracts. Right? So tracts are the names for the bundles of axons that run through the central nervous system. So we have ascending tracts that move upward, and they're going to be taking sensory information towards the brain. And they typically are going to be kind of concentrated in the dorsal area of the spinal cord. Now we're also going to have descending tracts in the white matter. And if ascending is bringing sensory towards the brain, then descending is going to be taking that motor information out. And they are going to be, there's going to be some in the ventral area and also some in the lateral area that we'll take a look at. And as kind of a little bit of a preview into where we're going to be heading next with the peripheral nervous system, here's a cross-section of the spinal cord, but then we can also see the roots of the spinal nerves coming off the side. So we can see that there's a spinal nerve here and there's a spinal nerve here. It's important to know that when a spinal nerve connects to the spinal cord, coming in the posterior, the dorsal side is going to be sensory information. So this is going to be sensory input coming in. There's an area here called the dorsal root ganglia. That's where we have a lot of cell bodies concentrated on the dorsal side. And then as those axons enter the spinal cord, there's going to be a lot of sensory nuclei from the sensory cell bodies and the dorsal side of our gray matter. Now, motor, on the other hand, is going to come out the front. Let me switch to red for motor. So here we're going to have lots of cell bodies, so motor nuclei, sending information out the ventral side. So this is going to be motor, right? So afferent approaching sensory always comes in the back. Motor efferent always exits out the front, and then they come together to form spinal nerves, which are going to be mixtures of motor and sensory fibers. Another thing to kind of note here is that between motor and sensory nerves, we sometimes have what is called an interneuron. So sometimes there is an interneuron that connects the motor to the sensory also within the spinal cord. Okay, so that's kind of it for the introduction to the central nervous system and its anatomy. And the next lecture, we'll take a look at the things that protect our central nervous system structures.